Hey, welcome to Expanded Knowledge. We have an interesting video today. If you've seen in the UFO circle in the last 24 hours, there are claims popping up that Dick Cheney is at the top of the UFO secrecy, and that this is what whistleblower David Grusch said. So we're going to dive into this because this is very interesting. And we're going to look at what did Grusch actually say. We're going to look at a lot more, right? Because if you start to unpack this, and I guarantee you nobody probably will go this deep into how naming Cheney would possibly uncover some clues and possibly, and just to look at how much of a UFO connection Cheney and all his close associates has, and not only UFO connection, but a state secrecy legacy. Okay, so we're gonna look into this now. Just posting these two videos, right? That kind of broke this, as far as I can see. Now, I know that these YouTube channels get things from Twitter, so I don't know if someone on Twitter broke this earlier, but in any event, here on YouTube, Post Disclosure World came out with this video yesterday. You know, Cheney, UFO gatekeeper, Dick Cheney controls UFO secrets, the shocking truth revealed, right? And then Vetted just put their episode out yesterday. Dick Cheney sits atop UFO pyramid, which honestly is misleading, okay, especially to put the arrow to David Grusch, because we're going to look at the primary source article, and he never says that. And if you really look into this deeper, yes, Cheney's definitely at the center of U.S. Elite state secrecy, as we'll see. But to jump to say that he's at the top of the UFO pyramid, that's a bit presumptuous. So, let's look in here, and first of all, let's just start with what Grusch said. Let's get some context, okay? Grusch gave this interview in October or November. The article doesn't really specify, of 2023, a few months after the hearing. All right, and we know Grusch testified at the hearing. He did a couple of interviews. He went on the Jesse Michaels show. He went on Joe Rogan and did a couple of little interviews in obscure newspapers. This one was some type of local newspaper. And in the blue, I've got the source listed here, so you can just Google this and you'll find it. You can read the whole thing yourself. It's pretty interesting. And it's called The Republic of Occluded Facts by Walter Kern. Here's what Grusch actually said in the interview. Kern here is saying, I say our presidents must know, and our CIA directors and their ilk. Grusch says, not necessarily, he says. I ask him to name the person who knows the most out of everyone who at least knows something. He offers a guess off the record, a formidable figure from late 20th century politics, though it's not among the few that I anticipated. I'm only guessing, he reminds me. So, okay. Grusch tells this reporter when he's asked, who do you think knows the most out of all the people who know something? And he gives a name to him, but stresses, I'm only guessing. All right. He's not saying that Dick Cheney's at the top of the UFO pyramid. Now, how did we know it was Dick Cheney? That's why this is news now, because this guy, Walter Kern, and you can see in this top video here, if you want to see this reporter, Walter Kern, really say it and see coverage on him recently, or somewhat recently, or at least someone digging it up recently, that he specified that it was Dick Cheney that David Grusch told him he was guessing knows the most. You can check that out at Post Disclosure World. But here, right, we're going to look at this, and we're going to look a little bit into Dick Cheney, because this is very interesting. All right. It is significant that Grusch's best guess at Who Knows the Most is Dick Cheney, which is like kind of a little bit random, but if you look at the history of like the executive branch and state secrecy, it's not that surprising. All right. On the left here, this is a movie. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a whole movie done, a biopic about Dick Cheney, which is pretty interesting movie to watch. Good movie. Um, and honestly, they portray him not in such a great light. But you can check that out yourself. Now, on the right here, this is a book that I highly recommend. This would be like required reading if I were to teach like a UFO or like a conspiracy class or something, because this is a really good detailed history into how secrets have been, brutally kept by the United States government, mainly the executive branch, the president and the departments that surround the executive branch, not necessarily Congress, although there has been those actors in Congress for sure that are working together with them. So there's always been this little bit of a battle there. And this tells a great story. Now, one thing, that I stuck out to me about this book that was surprising, right? Because we all know Dick Cheney from being the vice president, right? The movie Vice, to George Bush, right? In the 2000s, early 2000s. But Cheney actually has a long history before that in the government, working with people who have said very interesting things about UFOs and have been implicated in a number of other manners in terms of covering up government secrets and covering up, dirty, dirty government secrets. So, not to mention there's a lot here, right? So, what we're going to kind of take a look at here is the Cheney, Rumsfeld, Ford, Nixon, Bush connections and UFO interest. All right. And we're going to look at some of these sources here. I'm going to pull up these books, right? Because that when I hear about this, Grusch saying possibly Cheney, that's pretty interesting because there's a really interesting connection between all these people here and, you know, saying that they've had connections, right? We're going to look at Rumsfeld, who Cheney worked with for 33 years. He was worked with him. And Rumsfeld has a very clear interest in UFOs. He was involved in creating the Space Force. Gerald Ford has spoken on UFOs. He was also central to the group that was trying to stop Congress from investigating once things like MK Ultra and all of that came out, and COINTELPRO and all of that came out in the 70s. These were the guys, right? And Nixon, right? It's the rumor is that Nixon was one of the few presidents that was fully read in, or as read in as a president gets, into the UFO, secrets. And there's even the story that he took the Jackie Gleason to the celebrity actor at that time, took him and saw an alien body. But as we'll see in the book here, it's actually the claim was coming from a NASA scientist, Clark McClellan, who said quite a lot of things in his time, but he said that Rumsfeld was involved in getting Nixon and Gleason access there. And then, of course, you've got Bush, who's connected with them all. And Bush is, the Bush family. His father was the CIA director, and who allegedly, when Bill Clinton asked him to see the UFO file, he told him, "You don't have a need to know." So it seems like these are the kind of people that are probably read in to a high degree into whatever the UFO cover up really is. Now, I think the pyramid goes higher personally, and it's a tighter group that knows even more, as I've been told by people who have connections into the insides of the bowels of our government and this issue. Nobody's fully read in, and they say like you'll either get the half-inch file or the 1-inch file, and maybe more if you have more connections or whatever. But these guys are very interesting. And remember, Nixon here, he was vice president to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower is the one who there's a lot of rumor and allegations about him even meeting with non-human intelligence back in 54. So it's quite interesting because these people all worked closely together. So let's take a moment now to actually look into the books that I was mentioning here. And so let me come over here, and we're going to take a look at some of the evidence and the the claims that I'm talking about here. We're going to come into this State of Silence book here first, all right, and just take a moment to look at Dick Cheney, all right. There he is, right, young Cheney, and remember, this is a professor at George Mason University. This is like a mainstream scholarly academic book. All the sources cited and everything. It's authoritative. And he's saying Cheney helped the administration manage fallout from revelations about abuses by the security state. Ever after, he would become a champion of presidential secrecy. And he was Gerald Ford's chief of staff. So if you go and study, which this is the book to read really to get brushed up on that, what happened in the mid 70s, it's really fascinating. The intelligence community, CIA, FBI, and all the others were doing crazy stuff. And some of it leaked out to the press. And then Congress put them on the spot. And we had these investigations, 3 investigations going on at once: the Church Committee, the Pike Committee, and the Rockefeller Committee. That was basically a House, a Senate, and a executive branch investigation into the abuses of the national security state, the intelligence community. And what they were able to pry out of that was pretty crazy. MK Ultra, right? That the CIA was doing mind control on unwitting citizens, and even causing the deaths of soldiers that didn't even know they were being drugged for mind control experiments. And it went on for 20 years. It started in 52 or 53 and went all the way up to the early 70s. And COINTELPRO from the FBI, which revealed that the FBI was infiltrating citizens' rights groups and citizen activist groups, and was subverting them, and was basically manipulating them, which is totally, illegal. And they also assassinated Fred Hampton. Just straight up assassinated this civil rights leader who was a Black Panther. He hadn't incited any violence. They just burst into his house and killed him. So stuff like that was coming out. Now, at the same time, that the UFO issue was also part of national security secrets. So Cheney becomes like the guy who really just like he was very good at what he did, and he put the lid back on everything. All right. As we see here, right? Donald Rumsfeld, who we're going to go check out next. Rumsfeld was, Cheney was Rumsfeld's assistant. And earlier I may have misspoken that they worked together for 33 years. Let's correct that here. Cheney was 33 when he started working for Rumsfeld. Okay. So, basically that is what happened here. Now, there was one other thing from this book I wanted to show you guys about Cheney. Cheney. All right. Yeah, I think that's the main part here. Okay, is that we know that Cheney was at the core of figuring out how to keep secrets. So it would totally make sense that the UFO issue would be in his wheelhouse. All right. Now, let's move over to Rumsfeld for a second here. Okay. Because look at Donald Rumsfeld. And this comes from Michael Sala's book about the Space Force, which is pretty interesting. And people don't really talk about Space Force that much. But, what's going on there? And how does that play into everything? So Rumsfeld was let's come in here for a second here. Should probably cue these up next time. But bear with me for a moment here. All right, Donald Rumsfeld's UFO background. So Rumsfeld was a Secretary of Defense under Gerald Ford. And, while serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, he took an active interest in UFOs as both a scientific curiosity and a national security threat. All right. He was a military pilot in the past, Navy. So maybe he even saw something himself. And Rumsfeld, as it says here, right? Rumsfeld played a key role in advising Nixon about UFOs. So they were connected. And the part that was pretty interesting here, right? The core fact was that Rumsfeld actually gave he was involved in the 1968. Yeah, here it is. He had a long history on the UFO topic, dating from July 29th, 1968, when the Congress House Committee on Aeronautics had the world's leading UFO researchers time. They did a hearing back then. Apologize for that. That just closed on me. So Rumsfeld was involved in this UFO hearing. He was interested in UFOs. Oops. And you can go and check this book out. All right, I'll leave it at that. But Michael Salla, to his credit, does a good job here of highlighting for you how clear the evidence is that Donald Rumsfeld was deeply involved in the UFO topic and in the creation of Space Force. All right. So you've got that connection because, like we said before, these guys are all connected, right? These guys all worked at the top levels together in the government, in the executive branch. Nixon was close to Eisenhower. Ford with Nixon, and there's stories about Ford. There's comments from Ford. All right, let's check those out real quick, actually. Because here in this document, we have some quotes about UFOs from these people. Here's Dick Cheney. He says, well, if I had been briefed on UFOs, I'm sure it would have been classified, right? Meaning, there's something there, and I'm not going to tell you about it. You can look back at Gerald Ford's comments if we come in here for a second and look at Gerald Ford. Where is he? Sorry, bear with me a moment. All right, you're going to be difficult. Fine. There he is. All right, this is in 1966. Gerald Ford, before he was president, but he's rising up the ranks. He says, I strongly recommend there be a commitment to the investigation of the UFO phenomenon. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility on UFOs and the greatest possible enlightenment on this subject. Yeah, sure. So anyway, but he's addressing UFOs. All right. Now let's look at Bush. All right. Who said some interesting things as well. There's Senior. And, CIA director, former president, Americans can't handle the truth, right? I am very careful in public life about dealing with classified information. I know a fair amount about the topic when being asked about UFOs. Let's look at George Bush Jr., all right? Where is he? Come on now. Sorry, guys. I just don't have time to fully prepare these things. And I wanted to cover this while it's happening here. It's quite interesting. Here's an interview between George Bush and Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel says, Did you go through the secret UFO documents? George Bush says, maybe. My daughters asked the same question. Jimmy Kimmel, would you be allowed to tell your daughters what was in those files? And George Bush says, no, and makes a very serious face. And that's that. And then here's another interview where he was asked, and he says, I know a fair amount. And then another question where he's asked about it, were you briefed on UFOs? He says, I did. I can't talk about UFOs. All right, so we see the kind of pattern here, right? And if you really want to, all right, let's pull up one more just to round this out. Let's look at the only thing that is on the record with Nixon talking about it. Although the rumors and stories about Nixon are, there are plenty of them. All right. Now, Nixon says, this is attributed to him, I'm not at liberty to discuss the government's knowledge of extraterrestrial UFOs at this time. I'm still personally being briefed on the subject. Now, this was attributed to him in something called, in an article by The Telegraph in 2009. And the Richard Nixon Foundation did respond to the quote, but it was interesting because they didn't deny it or confirm that it was authentic. They took like a kind of a neutral route, which was interesting. You think they would just deny it if he never said it. But anyway, so these guys are all implicated in the UFO secrecy, and Cheney, as is described in the book that I recommend you read, State of Silence, Cheney was like the golden boy. So for Grusch to say that's his best guess at who knows the most probably makes sense. Now, we're going to end this video by looking at possibly the implications of this and how it may relate to now. And before we go there, I just want to throw it out there, okay? Because it's just data about Dick Cheney. How reliable it is really, I haven't read the book that is cited here. But what I want to show you a brief glimpse of is some of the other wilder, darker stuff that's been out there about Dick Cheney. And this comes from David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret. All right. And he's citing someone who wrote a book, which is like a crazy book. What the heck is the name of the book? Let's look here. It's called Transformation of America by this individual. Her name is Kathy something. All right. I don't know the last name, but you can check all this out. This is in the book, David Icke's book. And her book is Transformation America. She claims, this is wild. I don't even really want to talk about this on the air, so I'm not going to say the grotesque things, but she makes some really grotesque claims about Dick Cheney that you can go read about there. And, look at what you've heard about Bohemian Grove, right? Which is like a weird elite. People say it's some type of occult kind of sinister. There's something to it, like a Bilderberg, Committee of 300 type of affiliation. I don't know. I haven't researched Bohemian Grove like that. But if you've been around the block, Bohemian Grove. And so here they are, right? Who goes there? George Bush, Gerald Ford, Dick Cheney. All right. And apparently, you can read into this, the claims about Cheney and his cronies there. So how deep does the rabbit hole go, right? How sinister is Dick Cheney? Well, we don't really know for that sense, but we know for sure, right, with the more reliable sources, again, that I'm citing here, State of Silence, we know that he was at the core of United States executive branch state secrecy. And he was brutal in his methods of getting things done, as the documentary shows. So this would all add up to Grusch saying last year that even today, apparently, right? Because Grusch, I mean, um, what's his name? Um, Cheney, he's not in the government anymore. So, that gets you wondering. That gets you wondering. Like, Grusch says that after doing his 4-year investigation from 2019 to 2023. And that's what he says is his best guess is Dick Cheney. Well, does that hint at that there's like a modern day MJ-12 group and Cheney is, high up there? Is Cheney MJ1 or is Cheney, high up in the new Majestic 12 or whatever they call the group now, if there is such a group, which there probably is on some level, at least for what the state and the players in private industry and government, how they organize, right? I think probably there's a deeper level that's, on the highest amount of involvement and knowledge that are probably interacting with the non-human intelligence, possibly the secret space programs and all that, right? That stuff's possible. I'm not saying like we should just believe that, but look at what Carl Nell has said. Interaction with non-human intelligence, that's very telling. And Carl Nell's citing Hayam Eshed, which I've covered in a past video. And Hayam Eshed said there is a galactic federation. This was the 30-year space chief of the Israeli military and government. And he came out and said that, and then nobody really said anything after that about him. And he's silent now. That there's a galactic federation and there's elements of the US government working with them. So it's all very interesting. Now let's end on this note. Let's bring it all up to today. I mean, the presidential debate for the United States was just 2 nights ago. And here's what stuck out to me. I watched the whole debate. Okay. But here's what stuck out to me. A couple things and like thematic things, but I noticed Kamala Harris saying that Dick Cheney was supporting her. And that stuck out to me just because like I had done the state secrecy research and Dick Cheney, which I never really knew, you always know him as like the bad guy. That was Bush's vice president, the war on terror and stuff. But no, like his career goes way back to the late 60s into the 70s, 80s, 90s. And he's just been the constant in the system, keeping the secrets. And so, sure, red flag, definitely a red flag. And look, I'm not partisan. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat or anything. I think that the presidents are compromised regardless, unfortunately. As I've read it to be described from people who have studied, like tried to pry into like the Bilderberg group, for example, and steering committees like that, the Trilateral Commission, which there's been some good research done. You can look at, for example, like Jim Marr's book, or even something less conspiratorial like Noam Chomsky. And, these groups definitely have that steering power. And the way it's described is like they've got a plan for either candidate and they've got a preference for one. So if Dick Cheney's supporting Kamala Harris, that is pretty significant. That tells us that they see her as a better option to kind of continue the status quo. Whereas Trump, for whatever reason, must not be aligned with this faction of the control group, which is Cheney. And this puts us in a tough position, actually, because this issue is really important. And, I think I like the kind of things that Harris is saying that she would focus on, like investing in the people. I think that's a great idea. She just seems more moderate and stable. And Trump, I think could invite a lot of instability And I personally don't like, just the kind of way that he carries himself. I mean, he says things that are not factual, and that's a big problem, right? Regardless of what you think or what your ideology is, a president of this country should be someone who, speaks based on facts, tries to, be the compromiser between all the diverse views in the country, and, take it on a case by case basis and want to cooperate. And I don't really see that Trump is like that. So I don't really like either of them, but I mean, I have nothing personally against the way that Harris carries herself, whereas I do have critical points on Trump. My point is this, though, right? This puts us in a conundrum because if we know that Cheney is supporting Harris, and look, I'll show you the clip real quick because I queued it up. I might as well just check it out.
In this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want,
so that's a red flag to me. She might be seeing it as a good thing, and that's certainly a great thing to drop there to get all those moderate, more conservative swing voters to go, oh, okay, those those conservatives, they're really neocons, are supporting Harris. So, I mean, but you got to ask why. Why are they supporting her? Is it because they know that they will be able to continue the system they have in place? Because she is, as much as she is a little different from Biden for sure, it's still Biden. And Biden for sure, again, you could go back to this book and I learned some stuff about Biden. Biden was in the Senate doing the bidding of the executive branch secrecy group. So he's connected to Cheney and all that. So it's a big web in there, you know what I mean? But we do have to look at this and just think, like what the significance is. So I hope that this information gives you a lot more depth into these claims that we're seeing popping up now, right? Like, first of all, separate the wheat from the shaft, right? David Grusch did not say that Dick Cheney's at the top of the UFO pyramid. All right. But that was his best guess off the record when asked who knows the most out of people who know something. Right. And as we've reviewed here today, Dick Cheney would make a lot of sense. Not just because he's been the major, like, golden boy, as it's put in the book here, of keeping secrets tight in the government, but also all the interesting connections to the UFO subject. Cheney very close to Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld actively involved in the UFO issue from the 60s, actively involved in promoting the Space Force. And what does that tell you about potentially, all right, if what Hayam has said is true, that there's a galactic federation and the US government's involved, wouldn't the Space Force be pretty significantly tasked to be dealing with that? And we don't hear too much about what the Space Force is doing. They can do classified top secrets just like everyone else. Is that separate from if Solar Warden is real, like Navy's secret space program, allegedly what Gary McKinnon uncovered when he hacked into the systems of the government, of NASA and the Department of Defense? Gerald Ford, right? There's been crazy UFO tales that he met an alien, but he was, at the very least, we know he was interested in UFOs and actively looking into it. Nixon, same thing. The stories of him showing people aliens, but we know he was interested in it, and we know he was a VP to Eisenhower. And we know all the stories about Eisenhower. And then, of course, the Bush lineage, which brings us more to the modern times, right? Dick Cheney was in there with Bush for 8 years, right? There was 2 terms for Bush. So that's nothing to be looked over, right? Because we see the connection of how the Bush family is deeply read into this topic, and also potentially part of more sinister things, you know. And so we should be keeping that all in mind as we have an election in a couple months, and we're going to have 4 years with an administration. And nothing against Kamala Harris. I actually like the things that she's saying, and she seems to be like a nice person. All right, but who knows what people are really like. But that's the vibe anyway I get. But even if she is a nice person and means well, we know that presidents are just temporary employees. They don't have to be read in, especially on the UFO issue. And whoever's really controlling things in a more permanent way, decades and decades, that a 4-year or 8-year administration's in and out, they know that they can keep things a certain way. And if Dick Cheney's publicly endorsing Kamala Harris, that is going to potentially be harder for the disclosure process. And we see we're getting to like a point right now. We're getting to like a pretty significant point where we have 2 hearings coming up, and we have more books coming out. Jay Stratton, as I covered in my last video. And so how will this unroll? And you better bet if Cheney's still involved with this, and people, whoever else it might be, it's probably nameless people. Again, I don't think Cheney's at the top of the pyramid. And I'll quote for you actually another book real quick before we sign off here. This is a good book to read, and I've cited this before in my other videos, but this one right here, The Secret Team by Fletcher Prouty. And he was the chief of special operations in the Pentagon for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His job was to oversee the CIA's covert operations throughout the world. And he did it during the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations. And he wrote this book. And he says that the people really calling the shots are totally anonymous. And he said he'd be in rooms with people who were like top of command, top of the so-called pyramid, right? But they would get a phone call and it was like they were taking orders from someone else. And his argument that he states is the anonymity is their greatest strength. So we might be getting into a layer here with the Dick Cheney claims of being at the center of UFO secrecy control. But we should remember that it's quite possible there's a whole nother anonymous control group that goes deeper, and maybe Cheney and whoever else are like the lambs being sacrificed here. Maybe they're the kind of people that will have to face the consequences of this, right? Maybe, they're compromised, blackmail, or they did enough things where it's like, well, you want to be found guilty for this. Not saying that Cheney or any of these people did this, but we do see there's at least some published claims of this. More heinous crimes. I'll just say that. Or do you want to be found guilty for covering up the existence of UFOs and aliens, right? Probably an easy decision. So I'm speculating, obviously, right? But Cheney's coming onto the scene here is pretty interesting. Is it just a random organic thing that happened? This guy, Walter Kern, just started talking about it, and now people are starting to cover it. How far up will it go? It starts at these low UFO channels. Relatively low, right? But they're not on the radar of the media, but it'll make its way probably up to Ross Coulthart. And Coulthart's kind of like the journalist that can bring this into at least News Nation and maybe have it on the radar of the mass media more. So how far will this go, or will this just be a passing note in UFO disclosure, in the UFO disclosure journey? So yeah, I hope you got value from this. I think it's interesting to take all this in, put it on a bookmark. The Rumsfeld Space Force stuff is like untapped. I feel like people should do more research into that. And Michael Salla did a good job there. I haven't finished reading that book. You can read the State of Silence book I told you to learn more about how secrets have been kept in the United States government. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.